In the glittering heart of Manhattan's elite dining scene, where the air hummed with the clink of crystal glasses and the murmur of high-stakes conversations, Emily Thompson found herself perched at a discreet corner table in La Bernardine, the Michelin-starred haven for New York's power brokers and social climbers. The restaurant's ambience was a symphony of understated luxury. Soft lighting cast golden hues over pristine white tablecloths. Fresh orchids adorned each setting, and the faint scent of truffle oil wafted from the open kitchen, where world-renowned chefs orchestrated culinary masterpieces. Emily, at 29, possessed a natural elegance that didn't rely on ostentation. Her warm hazel eyes sparkled with quiet intelligence, framed by soft waves of chestnut hair that she had tied back simply for the evening. She wore a modest cream dress, knee-length and tailored from soft linen, purchased from a small boutique in Brooklyn rather than the high-end ateliers lining Fifth Avenue. It was comfortable, unpretentious, much like her backgrounder, former social worker from the bustling, diverse neighborhoods of Brooklyn, where she had spent years advocating for foster children and community programs, scraping by on a salary that barely covered rent but filled her with purpose. Tonight, however, she was here as the wife of Daniel Carter, the 37-year-old visionary behind Horizon Ventures, a tech empire that had revolutionized artificial intelligence, turning him into one of America's youngest billionaires with a net worth exceeding $5 billion. Their love story had begun unexpectedly for years prior at a charity event in Central Park, where Emily was volunteering, organizing activities for underprivileged kids. Daniel, taking a rare break from his grueling schedule, had wandered in seeking inspiration beyond boardrooms and algorithms. He had been captivated not by her appearance, though she was undeniably striking, but by her passion for equity and her unyielding belief that small acts could change lives. They had talked for hours that day about systemic inequalities, the role of technology in bridging gaps, and the simple joys of a well-made sandwich from a street vendor. Daniel, with his piercing blue eyes, sharp features honed by years of high-pressure decisions, and a presence that commanded any room he entered at 6'3" inches tall, had fallen hard for her authenticity in a world drowning in spurfic, as Emily sat there now. Sipping sparkling water infused with cucumber slices, she glanced at her phone, noting the time. Daniel had excused himself moments ago for an urgent call from his San Francisco office, something about a breakthrough in neural network optimization that couldn't wait. She understood. His work was his lifeblood, and she admired how he channeled his success into philanthropic ventures, funding scholarships and AI literacy programs in underserved communities, often inspired by her own experiences. But in his absence, the restaurant's subtle hierarchies became more apparent. Around her, patrons dripped with affluence, women in couture gowns from Oscar de la Renta, their necks adorned with Cartier diamonds that caught the light like stars, men in bespoke suits discussing mergers and market disruptions. Emily felt the occasional glance, her way curious, appraising, sometimes dismissive. She smoothed her dress self-consciously, reminding herself that Daniel loved her for who she was, not for fitting into this mold. Yet a nagging doubt lingered, a remnant from their early days together when whispers about her being a mismatch had reached her ears at galas and dinners. She pushed it aside, focusing instead on the menu, contemplating the seared scallops that Daniel had raved about during their drive over in his sleek, black Tesla. It was then that she noticed the woman staring from a nearby table. Margaret Ellison, 48, was the epitome of old-money Manhattan blonde hair styled in a flawless chignon, sharp green eyes enhanced by subtle Botox, and a figure maintained through daily sessions with a celebrity trainer. She wore a sleek black Versace dress that hugged her curves, paired with Louboutin heels and a Hermes Birkin bag casually slung over her shoulder. Margaret was no stranger to this world. As the heiress to Ellison Realty, a family empire controlling vast swaths of prime New York real estate. She moved in circles where influence was currency and appearances were armor. Her husband, Victor, was a prominent developer, and together they hosted lavish parties at their Upper East Side penthouse, rubbing shoulders with politicians, actors, and moguls. But beneath her polished exterior lurked a sharp tongue and a worldview steeped in exclusivity, where newcomers, especially those who didn't scream wealth, were viewed with suspicion. Margaret had been mid-conversation with her companions, a group of similarly attired socialites gossiping about the latest Hampton scandal, when her gaze locked onto Emily. Something about the young woman's simple attire and solitary presence irked her, stirring a mix of disdain and territorial instinct. Whispering to her friends, she excused herself, her heels clicking authoritatively on the marble floor as she approached Emily's table. Emily looked up, sensing the impending confrontation, her heart rate quickening slightly. She had encountered subtle snubs before waitstaff overlooking her at events, or guests assuming she was staff, but nothing prepared her for the direct assault that followed. Margaret stopped beside the table, her posture radiating superiority, arms crossed over her chest. "Excuse me," she began, her voice laced with faux concern, but loud enough to draw attention from adjacent diners. "I couldn't help but notice you sitting here all by yourself. Are you perhaps in the wrong place? This is La Bernardine, not some casual bistro." Emily blinked, caught off guard, but maintaining her composure. "No, I'm not lost," she replied evenly, her Brooklyn accent soft but firm. "I'm waiting for my husband. We have a reservation." Margaret's lips curled into a condescending smile, her eyes raking over Emily's dress with obvious contempt. "Your husband? Quaint. But dear, look around. Do you see anyone else dressed like they just stepped out of a thrift store? Establishment has a certain ... standard." The word stung, but Emily refused to flinch, drawing on years of dealing with difficult cases in social work where empathy often trumped anger. "My clothing doesn't define my right to be here," she said, calmly, "and I'd appreciate it if you'd return to your table." But Margaret wasn't deterred. If anything, Emily's poise fueled her ire. She leaned in closer, her perfume a heavy floral blend overwhelming the space. "Oh, honey, it's not just the clothes, it's the whole package. You stick out like a sore thumb. Are you one of those influencers trying to sneak in for a photo op? Or perhaps hoping to catch the eye of some wealthy patron?" Nearby tables had gone quiet, forks hovering mid-air as diners eavesdropped, some pulling out phones discreetly to record. Emily felt heat rise to her cheeks, a mix of embarrassment and rising anger. "I'm here for dinner with my husband, who's on a call. Please leave me alone." Margaret laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that echoed, "Mysterious husband on a call, how convenient." "Listen, sweetheart, I've been coming here for years. I know the regulars, the faces that matter. You're not one of them. You're making everyone uncomfortable just by being here." Emily's hands trembled slightly under the table, but she met Margaret's gaze steadily. "What gives you the right to judge me? You don't know anything about me." Margaret's expression hardened, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper that still carried, "I know enough. People like you dressed like that, acting entitled, don't belong in spaces like this. This is for those who've earned it, not wandered in off the street." The confrontation escalated as Margaret's volume rose, drawing more eyes. She gestured dramatically around the room. "Look at these people, captains of industry, celebrities, real influencers. And then there's you, in that ... outfit. It's insulting, frankly. You're lowering the tone." Emily, drawing deep breaths, responded with measured words. "My worth isn't in my wardrobe. I work with children in need, helping them build better futures. That's what matters to me, not impressing strangers." But Margaret scoffed, uninterested in Emily's story. "Charity work, how noble. But that doesn't buy you a seat here. This meal costs more than your monthly salary, I'm sure. Why don't you do us all a favor and leave before you embarrass yourself further?" The cruelty was palpable, and Emily felt tears prick her eyes, not from weakness, but from the sheer injustice. She thought of her upbringing in Brooklyn, where her single mother had worked double shifts as a nurse to keep them afloat after her father's passing when she was 10. Emily had learned resilience early, juggling part-time jobs through college. At NYU, graduating with honors in social work, and dedicating her career to advocacy, marrying Daniel hadn't changed her core. If anything, it amplified her ability to give back as they jointly funded initiatives for youth empowerment. But in this moment, stripped of context, she was reduced to an interloper. Undeterred, Margaret pressed on, her voice now a stage whisper attracting the manager's attention from afar. "I'm Margaret Ellison, of Ellison Realty. We own half the skyline you see out there. I could have you removed with a single call. You're disrupting the evening for real guests." Emily's resolve hardened. She wouldn't be bullied. "Call whoever you want. I have every right to be here." This defiance seemed to snap something in Margaret, whose face flushed with rage. "How dare you talk back to me? Do you know who I am? Somebody like you doesn't get to dictate terms." Before Emily could react, Margaret's hand swung forward in a swift arc, connecting with Emily's cheek in a resounding slap that reverberated through the dining room like a thunderclap. The impact stung fiercely, Emily's head snapping to the side, a metallic taste blooming in her mouth from where her lip caught her teeth. Gasps erupted from surrounding tables, phones openly filming now as the room froze in collective shock. Margaret stood triumphant, her chest heaving, hands still tingling from the blow. "Maybe that will teach you some manners," she hissed. "Actions have consequences when you overstep." Emily touched her cheek gingerly, feeling the heat of the welt forming, her vision blurring momentarily with unshed tears. The humiliation was profound, a public stripping of dignity in a place meant for refinement. Yet, amid the pain, a fire ignited within her, the same determination that had seen her through challenging cases, like advocating for a foster teen, against bureaucratic red tape or organizing community drives during the pandemic. She wouldn't crumble. "You just assaulted me," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor. In front of witnesses, Margaret waved dismissively. "You were aggressive, threatening. Everyone saw it." But the lie hung thin. A murmur of dissent rippled through the crowd. An older gentleman at a nearby table, silver-haired and distinguished, cleared his throat. "I saw no such thing." This young lady was polite throughout. Margaret whirled on him. "Mind your own business, old man," but the damage was done. The scene had shifted from a private spat to a public spectacle, with diners whispering about calling authorities or sharing videos online, as the manager hurried over. Flustered and apologetic, Emily sat straighter, refusing to let Margaret's venom define her. She thought of Daniel, how he had always encouraged her to stay true to herself, even suggesting she wear whatever made her comfortable tonight, despite his gentle worry about the crowd's judgments. Their marriage was built on mutual respect. He from a privileged Boston family, but driven by innovation rather than inheritance. And she, grounding him with her real-world perspective. But now, alone in this storm, she wondered if this world would ever truly accept her. The slap wasn't just physical. It was a manifestation of the barriers she had tried to ignore, the assumptions that her skin tone light olive from her mixed heritage or her modest style marked her as lesser. Margaret, sensing the tide turning slightly, doubled down. "She's faking it for sympathy. Look at her, probably planning to sue the restaurant. That's how these types operate." The accusation drew more gasps, but Emily met it head-on. "I'm not here to scam anyone. I'm here to enjoy an evening with my husband." The manager arrived, wringing his hands. "Ladies, perhaps we can resolve this privately." But Margaret barked, "Remove her immediately. She's the problem." Emily's mind raced, recalling similar microaggressions. The time at a charity ball where a guest mistook her for a server, or the board meeting where her input on social impact was dismissed until Daniel echoed it. Each incident chipped away, but tonight's escalation was a breaking point. She stood slowly, her legs steady, addressing Margaret directly. "Your prejudice says more about you than me. Hitting someone doesn't make you superior. It makes you a bully." The words hung heavy, and for a split second, Margaret's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she masked it with scorn. "Prejudice? Please. This is about standards. Class, you don't have it." The standoff intensified, the restaurant's usual elegance shattered by the raw display of entitlement versus resilience. Diners debated in hushed tones, some defending Margaret's right to question, others appalled at the violence. Emily, cheek throbbing, held her ground, knowing Daniel would return soon. But in this moment, she was fighting for more than herself. It was for every person ever made to feel unwelcome in spaces not designed for them. The elderly gentleman rose, his wife nodding supportively. "I've dined here for decades, and I've never seen such disgraceful behavior. Young lady, you handled that with grace." His words emboldened others. A young couple nearby added, "We saw the whole thing. She approached you, unprovoked." Margaret's composure cracked, her face paling as she realized the narrative slipping. "This is ridiculous. Do you know what my family contributes to this city? We built it." But her bluster rang hollow. Emily, empowered by the support, felt a surge of clarity. This wasn't just about one slap. It was a microcosm of societal divides, where wealth insulated the cruel from accountability. She imagined her former clients, kids from broken homes who faced judgment daily and channeled their strength. "Your family's money doesn't excuse assault. If anything, it makes your actions worse. You have no excuse for ignorance." As tension peaked, the door to the private lounge swung open, and Daniel strode in, his expression shifting from focused to furious in an instant upon seeing the scene. But before he could intervene, Emily took a breath, ready to articulate her truthfully, turning the confrontation into a stand for dignity that would echo beyond these walls. The room held its breath, the air thick with anticipation. As Margaret's mistake began to unravel her carefully curated world, one judgmental glance at a time. Emily's journey through this ordeal was just beginning, but in this pivotal moment, she discovered an inner fortitude that no amount of wealth could buy or diminish, setting the stage for a reckoning that would challenge not only Margaret's entitlement, but the very foundations of the elite circles they inhabited in the wake of the resounding slap that had silenced La Bernardine's opulent dining room. Emily Thompson sat with her cheek burning, the sharp sting of Margaret Ellison's hand lingering like an echo of the prejudice that had fueled it. The restaurant, a glittering enclave of New York's elite, had transformed into a stage where every eye was fixed on the unfolding drama. The soft clink of crystal and the hum of refined conversation had been replaced by a tense, almost suffocating quiet, broken only by the occasional whisper or the faint jazz notes drifting from the sound system. Emily, in her simple cream dress, felt the weight of dozens of gazes, some curious, some judgmental, others horrified as they took in the red welt blooming across her face. Her hazel eyes, usually warm with compassion, now glinted with a mix of pain and defiance. She touched her cheek gingerly, the heat radiating under her fingertips, and tasted the faint metallic tang of blood where her lip had caught her teeth. Yet, despite the public humiliation, Emily's resolve hardened. Rooted in years of navigating spaces where she was underestimated first as a girl from Brooklyn's working-class streets, then as a social worker advocating for kids' society, had written off, and now as the wife of Daniel Carter, a billionaire whose world she had entered but never fully embraced. Margaret, standing over her like a victorious predator, radiated smug satisfaction, her black Versace dress catching the light as her diamond-encrusted wrist gleamed. At 48, she was a fixture in Manhattan's high society, her family's real estate empire granting her a sense of invincibility. "Maybe now you'll learn your place," she sneered, her voice carrying just enough for nearby tables to hear, ensuring the spectacle remained public. "This isn't your world, and pretending otherwise only makes you look pathetic." Emily's hands clenched in her lap, her nails digging into her palms as she fought the urge to shrink under the assault. She thought of her mother, who had worked grueling night shifts to keep them afloat, teaching her that dignity wasn't tied to wealth, but to how you carried yourself in the face of adversity. "You don't get to decide where I belong," Emily said, her voice low but steady, cutting through the silence. "You attacked me because of your assumptions, not because of anything I did." Margaret's lips curled into a mocking smile. "Assumptions. I saw a nobody in a cheap dress sitting at a prime table, acting like she owns the place. That's not an assumption. That's a fact." The lie was brazen, and Emily felt a surge of anger, but she held her ground, refusing to let Margaret rewrite the narrative. "The only fact here is that you assaulted me," she replied, her tone gaining strength. "And everyone in this room saw it." A murmur rippled through the crowd, some diners nodding in agreement, others shifting uncomfortably as they weighed the social dynamics at play. Margaret's status as an Ellison carried weight, but the raw injustice of her actions was impossible to ignore. A silver-haired gentleman at a nearby table, his wife beside him in a tasteful emerald dress, spoke up again, his voice calm but authoritative. "I've been coming here for 30 years, and I've never witnessed such a disgrace. This young woman was minding her own business when you approached her." His words emboldened a younger couple nearby, who added, "She's right too, came out of nowhere and started insulting her." Margaret whirled on them, her face flushing with fury. "Stay out of this. You don't know who you're dealing with." But her attempt to reassert control faltered as more eyes turned against her, the tide of public opinion shifting. The restaurant manager, a wiry man named Thomas in a crisp suit, hurried over, his face pale with the anxiety of a public relations nightmare unfolding in his pristine establishment. "Mrs. Ellison, please, let's discuss this privately," he stammered, glancing nervously at Emily's reddening cheek. Margaret snapped, "There's nothing to discuss. She doesn't belong here, and I want her gun now." Emily, undeterred, met Thomas's eyes. "I was assaulted while sitting at my table. I'm not the one who should leave." The manager hesitated, caught between Margaret's influence and the undeniable evidence of her aggression. Before the situation could escalate further, the heavy glass doors of Le Bernardine's swung open, and Daniel Carter strode into the dining room, his presence like a storm rolling in from the horizon. At 6'3", clad in a tailored navy suit that accentuated his broad shoulders, he moved with the confidence of a man who had built an empire from scratch, his piercing blue eyes scanning the room until they landed on Emily. The sight of the red mark on her cheek stopped him cold, his expression shifting from focused to a controlled fury that made several diners instinctively lean back in their seats. He crossed the room in long, purposeful strides, the air around him crackling with authority. Margaret, misreading his approach, seized the opportunity to pivot, her tone suddenly ingratiating. "Thank goodness, someone with sense," she said, loudly, gesturing toward Emily. "Sir, this woman is causing a disturbance. She needs to be removed immediately." Daniel stopped beside Emily's table, his gaze never leaving Margaret, and when he spoke, his voice was a low, dangerous rumble that seemed to vibrate through the marble floor. "Did you just put your hands on my wife?" The question landed like a thunderclap, silencing the room entirely. Margaret's triumphant smirk froze, then melted into a mask of shock as the weight of her mistake crashed over her. Her green eyes widened, darting between Daniel's imposing figure and Emily's tear-streaked but resolute face. "Your wife," she stammered, her voice barely audible, the color draining from her face so rapidly that her makeup stood out starkly against her pallor. Daniel stepped closer to Emily, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, a gesture of protection that contrasted sharply with the barely contained rage in his posture. "My wife," he repeated, each word deliberate, cutting through the air like a blade. "Emily Carter, the woman you just assaulted in front of an entire restaurant." Gasps erupted from the crowd, and whispers spread like wildfire, diners pulling out phones to Google Daniel's name, others texting furiously. "That's Daniel Carter," someone murmured. "The AI billionaire from Horizon Ventures. She hit his wife." The revelation sent a ripple of disbelief through the room, and Margaret's legs wobbled, forcing her to grip a nearby chair for support. Daniel's eyes, as cold as Arctic ice, locked onto Margaret. "Explain yourself," he demanded. "What gave you the right to approach my wife, insult her, and lay a hand on her?" Margaret's mouth opened and closed, her usual poise shattered. I didn't know who she was," she whispered, then winced at how damning the admission sounded. She didn't look like she belonged here. Daniel's jaw tightened, and Emily felt the tension radiating from him, his protective instincts warring with his restraint. "Didn't look like she belonged." "Us," he repeated, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "So you judged her based on her dress, her appearance, and decided she didn't deserve respect? You thought you could humiliate her because you assumed she was powerless." Margaret flinched, her hands trembling as she clutched the chair. "It wasn't like that. I thought she was out of place. I was protecting the ambience of this restaurant." The excuse rang hollow, and the elderly gentleman interjected again. "Protecting the ambience doesn't involve slapping someone. I saw the whole thing. She was nothing but polite until you attacked her." The manager, Thomas, tried to intervene, his voice shaky. "Mr. Carter, I'm deeply sorry for this incident. We value all our guests," and Daniel cut him off, his gaze still fixed on Margaret. "This isn't about your restaurant, Thomas. It's about a woman who thought she could degrade my wife and walk away unscathed." He turned to Emily, his expression softening as he gently touched her cheek, assessing the mark. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low, meant only for her. Emily nodded, though the sting lingered, both physical and emotional. "I'm fine," she said quietly, but her eyes betrayed the hurt of being publicly diminished. Daniel's thumb brushed her cheekbone, a tender gesture that made several women in the room sigh softly. Moved by the contrast between his fury and his care, Margaret, sensing the situation spiraling, tried to backpedal. "Mr. Carter, I swear, it was a misunderstanding. I thought she was causing trouble. I didn't mean to." Daniel's head snapped back to her. "You didn't mean to slap her, or you didn't mean to get caught." His words were sharp, unrelenting, and Margaret shrank further, her bravado crumbling. I made a mistake," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes, though they seemed more from fear of consequences than genuine remorse. "A mistake?" Daniel echoed, stepping closer, his height and intensity making her seem small by comparison. "You walked over to my wife's table, insulted her character, mocked her clothes, and then struck her because you thought you could. That's not a mistake, it's a choice." Emily, watching the exchange, felt a complex swirl of emotions. She was proud of Daniel's defense, but the public spectacle was overwhelming, amplifying the humiliation she had already endured. She thought of her years in social work, facing down bureaucratic gatekeepers or dismissive officials to secure resources for her clients. Those battles had taught her resilience, but this was different. This was personal. A direct assault on her identity in a space meant to celebrate her life with Daniel. She squeezed his hand, grounding herself. "Daniel," she said softly. "Let me speak." He hesitated, his protective instincts urging him to shield her, but he nodded. Stepping back slightly to give her the floor, Emily rose from her chair, her posture straight despite the tremor in her legs. She faced the room, aware of the phones still recording, the eyes dissecting her every move. "What happened tonight wasn't just about me," she began, her voice clear and steady, carrying the authority of someone who had spent years advocating. For others, it's about what happens when people assume they can judge someone's worth based on how they look or what they wear. Mrs. Ellison didn't know who I was married to, but that shouldn't matter. No one should have to prove they belong in a place like this or anywhere by meeting someone else's standards of wealth or status. Several diners nodded, their expressions shifting from curiosity to respect. The elderly couple clapped, softly, encouraging her to continue. "I grew up in Brooklyn," Emily said, her voice gaining strength. "My mother was a single parent, working 2 jobs to keep us fed. I put myself through college with scholarships and late-night shifts at a diner. I've spent my life helping kids who society overlooks, teaching them their worth more than their circumstances. When I met my husband, I wasn't looking for his wealth, I was looking for a partner who shared my belief that we can make the world better, one person at a time." Her words resonated, and Daniel's eyes shone with pride, his hand finding hers again. "Mrs. Ellison saw my dress and decided I didn't belong. She didn't ask about my work, my life, or why I was here. She assumed, insulted, and then attacked me. That's not a misunderstanding, it's prejudice, plain and simple." Margaret, tears now streaking her face, tried to interject. "I didn't mean it like that. I was just upset." "I thought," Emily cut her off, her voice firm but not cruel. "You thought I was an easy target because I don't wear diamonds or designer labels. You thought you could humiliate me and walk away. But you were wrong." The room erupted in murmurs of agreement, and Margaret's face crumpled, the weight of her actions sinking in. The elderly gentleman stood again. "Young lady, you've shown more class tonight than anyone in this room. Mrs. Ellison, you owe her an apology and more." Margaret shook her head, desperation creeping into her voice. "I'm sorry, okay? I didn't know who she was. I'll make it right." But her apology felt hollow, a reflex to save face rather than a genuine reckoning. Daniel, his patience exhausted, spoke again, his tone icy. "You didn't know who she was because you didn't care to know. You saw someone you thought was beneath you and acted on it. But let me make something clear, Mrs. Ellison, my wife is worth more than your entire family's empire, and not because of my money, because of who she is." He turned to the manager. "Thomas, I trust you'll ensure this incident is reported properly. My security team is already on its way, and the authorities will be involved." As if on cue, 2 men in dark suits entered, their presence understated but commanding. They approached the table, one addressing Daniel. "Mr. Carter, we're here." "Is this the individual?" Daniel nodded. "Mrs. Ellison assaulted my wife. Please escort her out and coordinate with the police." Margaret's panic surged. "You can't do this. My husband, Victor Ellisonhe'll have your head for this. We're not people you cross." Daniel's smile was cold. "Victor's been pitching Horizon Ventures for a partnership on our new Manhattan campus. That deal was worth $300 million to Ellison Realty. Was worth, past tense. I'll be calling him tomorrow to let him know we're going with another firm." The implication hit Margaret like a physical blow. She swayed, clutching the chair tighter. "You can't," she whispered. "That deal is our lifeline." Daniel didn't blink. "You should have thought of that before you raised your hand to my wife." The room buzzed with shock, diners whispering about the fallout. Emily, watching Margaret's world unravel, felt a pang of pity but quickly dismissed it. This wasn't about revenge, was about accountability. She leaned into Daniel, drawing strength from his presence, but her mind raced with the bigger picture. This incident would ripple beyond La Bernardine, likely going viral on social media, exposing not just Margaret's cruelty, but the underlying biases that permeated these elite spaces. She thought of her former clients, kids who faced similar judgments daily, and felt a renewed sense of purpose. "Daniel," she said quietly, "we need to do more than punish her. This can't happen again, not to anyone." He nodded, understanding her intent. "What do you have in mind?" Emily faced Margaret, her voice calm but resolute. "I want you to volunteer at a community center in Brooklyn for 6 months, not as a photo op, but real work helping kids. Listening to their stories, learning what it means to see people for who they are, not what they wear." Margaret blinked, stunned by the request. "Volunteer? I don't. I'm not that kind of person." Emily's gaze didn't waver. "Then, become that kind of person, or we'll pursue every legal avenue available, and the world will know exactly what happened here tonight." The threat was delivered with quiet dignity, and Margaret, cornered, nodded weakly. "I'll do it," she whispered, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of calculation, as if she were already planning how to spin this as the security team led Margaret away. Her protests fading into the background, the dining room began to thaw. Conversations resuming in hushed tones. Emily and Daniel remained standing, the weight of the confrontation lingering. The elderly couple approached, offering their contact information for police statements. And others followed, expressing solidarity. Emily felt tears prick her eyes, not from pain, but from gratitude for those who saw the truth. Daniel pulled her close, his voice soft. "You were incredible. I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner." Emily shook her head. "You're here now. That's what matters." But as they prepared to return to their meal, Emily knew this wasn't the end. Margaret's actions had exposed a raw nerve, and the fallout, both personal and public, would test their resilience in ways they couldn't yet foresee. Yet, in this moment, with Daniel by her side and the room's respect earned through her courage, Emily felt a spark of hope that justice, and perhaps change, was possible. The air in La Bernardine's dining room hung heavy with the aftermath of Margaret Ellison's public unraveling. The once pristine elegance now fractured by the raw confrontation that had unfolded. Emily Thompson stood beside her husband, Daniel Carter. Her cream dress slightly creased from the tension of the evening. The red mark on her cheek, a fading but potent reminder of the assault she had endured. The restaurant, a glittering beacon of Manhattan's elite, buzzed with whispered conversations as diners processed the spectacles, some still clutching their phones. Videos already circulating on social media, others exchanging glances of sympathy or shock. The soft jazz that had resumed seemed incongruous against the weight of what had transpired. Emily's hazel eyes, bright with a mix of resolve and exhaustion, scanned the room, taking in the faces that had shifted from judgment to admiration. Daniel's arm rested protectively around her waist, his navy suit impeccable, but his posture radiated a quiet fury that hadn't fully dissipated. At 6'3", with piercing blue eyes and a presence honed by years of commanding boardrooms, he was a force, yet his touch on Emily was gentle, grounding her as they stood together in the wake of Margaret's departure, escorted out by security to face the Beverly Hills police. Margaret's final, desperate pleas echoed faintly in Emily's mind. "This is insane. My husband will sue." But they were drowned out by the solidarity of strangers who had stood up for her, like the silver-haired gentleman and his wife, whose kind eyes had bolstered her courage. Yet, as the room began to settle, Emily sensed the night was far from over. Margaret's venomous accusations, particularly her attempt to paint Emily as a calculated gold digger, had struck a deeper chord, unearthing insecurities Emily had buried since entering Daniel's world. The real battle, she realized, wasn't just about confronting Margaret. It was about reclaiming her narrative in a society. Quick to judge, Margaret's exit had left a void, but it was quickly filled by a new energy as diners approached Emily and Daniel, offering support. The elderly gentleman, whose name they learned was Charles Whitaker, a retired judge with a reputation for integrity, handed Daniel his card. "If you need witnesses, my wife and I will testify to everything we saw," he said, his voice steady. His wife, Eleanor, added, "You handled that with remarkable grace, my dear. Don't let her poison linger." A young couple, tech entrepreneurs who recognized Daniel from industry events, echoed the sentiment, promising to share their footage with authorities. Emily nodded, her throat tight with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, her Brooklyn accent carrying a warmth that contrasted with the room's polished veneer. "Your support means more than you know." But beneath her composure, a storm brewed. Margaret's words, a nobody who seduced a rich man, had sliced into doubts Emily had wrestled with since her marriage. She had met Daniel for years ago at a Central Park charity event, her passion for helping foster kids sparking their connection, not his wealth. Yet the whispers of mismatch at galas, the sidelong glances at her modest style, had always lingered. Tonight, those whispers had been weaponized, and while Daniel's defense had been fierce, Emily couldn't shake the fear that some part of him might wonder, even fleetingly. If there was truth to Margaret's accusations, Daniel sensed her unease, his blue eyes searching her face. "Let's get out of here," he murmured, his hand tightening briefly on her waist. "You don't need to endure this any longer." But Emily shook her head, a spark of defiance flaring. "No," she said firmly. "Margaret wanted me gone. I'm not giving her that victory. We came here for dinner, and we're going to finish it." Daniel's expression softened into a smile, pride evident in his gaze. "That's my girl," he said, guiding her back to their table. As they sat, the manager, Thomas, approached nervously, his face still pale from the ordeal. "Mr. Carter, Mrs. Carter, your meal is on the house tonight, and we'd be honored to host you any time in the future." Emily met his eyes, her voice calm but pointed. "Thank you, Thomas, but this isn't about a free meal. It's about making sure no one else feels unwelcome here the way I did." Thomas nodded, chastened. "Of course, we're reviewing our policies to ensure this never happens again." Daniel leaned forward, his tone measured but firm. "Good, because my wife's safety and the safety of every guest shouldn't depend on who they're married to." As the restaurant's rhythm slowly returned, waitstaff resuming their seamless service, Emily and Daniel ordered their meal-seared scallops for her, grilled swordfish for him, but the food felt secondary. Emily's mind was elsewhere, replaying the confrontation, not just with Margaret, but with the broader world she represented. She thought of her years as a social worker, fighting for kids like Jamal, a foster teen she'd helped secure a scholarship for, or Maria, a girl who'd escaped an abusive home with Emily's advocacy. Those battles had been tough, but clear-cut. This one was murkier, tangled in social hierarchies and unspoken biases. She glanced at Daniel, who was watching her with a mix of concern and admiration. "You're quiet," he said softly, reaching for her hand across the table. "Talk to me." Emily hesitated, the weight of her thoughts pressing down. "It's not just what she did," she admitted, her voice low. "It's what she said. Calling me a gold digger, saying I planned our meeting, that I'm playing a role to keep you. It's everything I've been afraid people think about me." Daniel's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "Emily, you know that's not true. I know you. I know us." She nodded, but her eyes dropped to her plate. I know you do. But hearing it out loud, in front of everyone made me wonder how many others think the same. How many times will I have to prove I'm not that person? Daniel leaned closer, his voice fierce with conviction. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. It's the moment I met you, I knew you were different. We were organizing games for kids in a park, covered in grass stains, laughing like you didn't have a care in the world. You didn't know who I was, and you didn't care. You asked me to help hand out water bottles, not for a donation. Emily smiled faintly at the memory, the autumn sun warm on her face that day, Daniel in a casual sweater looking out of place but eager to pitch in. I fell in love with your heart, he continued, not some calculated act. And every day, since you've shown me who you are, someone who'd rather fund a community center than buy a designer bag, who still volunteers even with all we have. Margaret's wrong, and so is anyone who buys her lies. Emily squeezed his hand, her heart swelling, but the doubt lingered. A shadow cast by years of navigating spaces where she felt like an outsider. The meal arrived, the scallops perfectly golden, the swordfish fragrant with herbs, but Emily's appetite was tempered by the weight of the evening. Around them, diners cast occasional glances, some offering small smiles of encouragement, others whispering about the viral potential of the videos now spreading online. Emily imagined the headlines, "Billionaire's wife assaulted at La Bernardine," and felt a mix of dread and determination. This wasn't just her story anymore. It was a moment that could spark change, or at least a conversation. She thought of her mother, who had faced similar judgments as a black nurse in predominantly white hospitals, yet never let it dim her pride. You hold your head high, her mother had told her once, because no one can take your worth unless you let them. Emily straightened in her seat, channeling that strength. I want to do something with this, she said suddenly, her voice firm. Daniel raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? She met his gaze, a plan forming. Margaret's going to that community center, but it's not enough. I want to use this moment to show people what happens when you judge based on appearances, maybe a campaign, something to fund programs that teach empathy, inclusion, real change. Daniel's eyes lit up, his business mind clicking into gear. Horizon Ventures could back it. We've got the resources, the platform, name it, and it's yours. Emily shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. It's not just about money, Daniel. It's about showing people like Margaret that worth isn't tied to wealth or status. I want to involve the community, kids, teachers, everyday people. Let them tell their stories. Daniel nodded, impressed. You're turning this into something bigger than tonight. I'm in whatever you need. Their conversation was interrupted by Charles Whitaker, who approached with Eleanor, his wife. Pardon the intrusion, Charles said, but we couldn't help overhearing. If you're planning something to address what happened, we'd like to help. I sit on the board of a local education nonprofit. Perhaps we could collaborate. Emily's heart lifted. The support was unexpected but welcome. That would be incredible, she said. I'm thinking of a program that brings people from different worlds together, rich, poor, young, old, to learn from each other. As they exchanged ideas, the restaurant's atmosphere shifted subtly, the earlier tension giving way to a sense of shared purpose. Diners nearby leaned in, some offering suggestions, a lawyer volunteering pro bono services, a journalist promising to cover the initiative. Emily felt a spark of hope, the kind she hadn't felt since her early days in social work, when every small victory felt like changing the world. But the moment was pierced by a sharp buzz from Daniel's phone. He glanced at it, his expression darkening. It's Victor Ellison, he said quietly. Margaret's husband. Emily's stomach tightened, anticipating a confrontation. Daniel answered, his tone clipped. Victor, this isn't a good time. The voice on the other end was loud. Enough for Emily to hear fragments: apologies, pleas for discretion, mentions of their business deal. Daniel's response was cold. Your wife assaulted mine. The deal's off, and you'll be hearing from our lawyers. He hung up, his jaw set, but Emily caught a flicker of concern in his eyes. He's desperate, Daniel said. Ellison Realty's over-leveraged. Losing our contract could bankrupt them. Emily processed this, her empathy warring with her. Anger. What about their kids? She asked. Gret mentioned children. They don't deserve to suffer for her actions. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. I know. Actions have consequences, and she made her choice. Emily nodded, but her mind churned. She didn't want revenge. She wanted accountability that led to growth. Maybe there's a way to balance it, she said. Let her do the volunteer work, but make it meaningful. No cameras, no publicity. She needs to understand the people she dismissed. Daniel studied her, his admiration clear. You're better than I am, he said. I'd have crushed her without a second thought. Emily smiled wryly. I'm not doing it for her. I'm doing it for everyone else who might face someone like her. Their meal continued, the food now tasting, richer with the promise of action. Emily sketched out her vision on a napkin: a series of workshops where people from diverse backgrounds could share their experiences, funded by Horizon Ventures, but driven by community voices. Charles and Eleanor stayed, joining their table. Their insights as seasoned philanthropists adding depth to the plan. The restaurant, once a battleground, became a space of collaboration. The diner's earlier voyeurism replaced by genuine engagement. Emily felt a shift within herself. The pain of Margaret's attack transforming into purpose. She wasn't just Daniel Carter's wife or a former social worker. She was Emily Thompson, a woman who could turn a moment of cruelty into a catalyst for change. As they finished dessert, a delicate lemon tart that melted on the tongue, Daniel leaned back, watching her with a look that held both love and awe. You know, he said, when we met, I thought I was the one who'd change the world. But you're doing it right now, in this room. Emily blushed, but her smile was genuine. We're doing it together, she corrected. You give me the courage to keep going. The moment was interrupted by Thomas, who approached with a bottle of vintage champagne. From the staff, he said, as a gesture of apology and respect. Emily accepted it graciously, but her mind was already on the future, on the workshops. The stories, the chance to show that dignity wasn't a privilege but a right. 3 months later, the fallout from that night would reshape Manhattan's social landscape. Margaret Ellison, sentenced to community service and mandatory counseling, began her work at a Brooklyn community center, her initial resentment giving way to reluctant learning as she faced the real lives of those she'd once dismissed. Ellison Realty, crippled by the loss of Horizon's contract, downsized dramatically, forcing the family to sell their penthouse. But for Emily and Daniel, the true legacy was the Belong Anywhere initiative, a nationwide program that brought together thousands to share stories of exclusion and resilience. Funded by Horizon but led by voices like Emily's. That night at La Bernardine became a turning point, not just for them, but for a community that learned through one woman's courage. That love and authenticity could triumph over prejudice. As they left the restaurant, hand in hand, Emily felt lighter. Not because the world had changed, but because she had chosen to change it one story at a time.